At 8 o'clock in the morning, Adler and the representatives were gathered on the mountain. He glanced at his Rolex watch with a grin. It's 8 a.m. Everyone's here except the United States representative. Cadis's representative spoke up. Maybe he got cold feet. As a follower of Warhawk, Cadis went along with everything they did. I think so too, Adler said. The show can't begin without the sovereign. We can't wait all day. He gave Cadis's representative a meaningful look. As the host of the Transatlantic Summit, Cadis had made a public announcement. Every representative had arrived except for the sovereign. To ensure the smooth progression of the event, the representatives had reached a unanimous decision to wait 5 hours for the sovereign. If he didn't show up in 5 hours, the U.S. would lose its right to participate. And to show his sincerest apologies, he had to place the banner at the summit. This announcement immediately caught the people of the United States' attention. This concerned their prestige. If the sovereign was forced to withdraw because he couldn't make it in time, it would be a great humiliation to the country. At this time, Stephen was still on the private jet. When he received the message, he realized that Cadis was stalling not only to eat away at his energy, but also to delay his arrival. The whole world was paying attention to the summit. If he was late, it would disgrace the U.S. The problem was, how was he supposed to make it to the peak of Mount Wreath in 5 hours? Stephen stood up and addressed Cadis's emissaries for the first time. Everyone, you've been with me on the plane for an entire night. It's time for you to take a break. Cadis's emissaries had been exposed, but they weren't embarrassed in the least. We should indeed take a break. Since the sovereign has spoken, we'll begin our descent. They informed the pilot and the squadron waiting on the mountain. The plane landed at the foot of the mountain. Mount Wreath was the highest mountain range of Cadis above sea level. It spanned hundreds of miles and was thousands of feet high. From where the plane had landed, it would take the sovereign at least 6 hours to reach the location where the summit was being held. Cadis didn't provide him with any tools or gear. The only way up was to walk. Mr. Sovereign, you only have 5 hours to make it to the Transatlantic Summit and place your banner at the highest point. If you fail, it will be considered as the U.S. forfeiting the event. The representatives don't tolerate tardiness. This is an important international event. It's shameful for anyone to be late. Cadis's emissaries said their piece and boarded the jet. Before they left, they made a provocative gesture at the sovereign. We'll be waiting for you at the peak of the mountain. That's where the summit's being held. We hope you won't disappoint us. Stephen tightened his grip on the banner from the Leviathan unit. I'll be there. The summit is a grand event. How could the U.S. be left out? I'll place this banner at the peak. Just wait. He's a madman, Cadis's emissary mocked when the jet took off. Trekking up the mountain was already a dangerous mission. There was no chance of him making it up the mountain alive. I don't get why the people of the United States are so stubborn. It's just a banner. How could it be more important than his own life? What they didn't understand was that the banner in Stephen's hand contained the hopes of the citizens. The sovereign could fall, but the banner could not. As long as their hopes remained, the country would never fall to ruin. The banner's probably their lifeline, another emissary said. When we get to the peak, I'll suggest to our superiors to destroy the banner before killing the sovereign off. With the banner in hand, Stephen walked up the mountain path. He made it to the peak in 5 hours. The Transatlantic Summit received a lot of attention because of the sovereign's participation. The entire U.S. was watching the broadcast of the summit on TV. The screen depicted the sovereign entering the depths of Mount Wreath alone. Cadis had prohibited the U.S. from broadcasting, so the film on screen was from the satellites. It wasn't that clear, but that didn't stop anyone from watching. Even the aristocratic families were glued to their screens. The sovereign's declaration that he would place the banner at the peak ignited the citizens' morale. The spectators cheered for him. The Cassidy family was also sitting in front of the TV. Unlike the rest of the country, they weren't that interested, but they were watching anyway because of Wayne's request. Wayne had used all of his resources, hoping to keep tabs on Stephen and Cadis. But so far, he hadn't been successful. Helen noticed Wayne and Rachel's nervous expressions. Don't worry, the Sovereign will definitely succeed. Yeah, he's invincible, Rome said. Our country's blessed by the stars. He won't fail. The Cassidy family wasn't that interested in the broadcast because they could barely make out anything on the screen. But their country was in a national crisis. They felt like the right thing to do was to watch the broadcast and support their sovereign. And the most important thing that Wayne had confirmed was that the Sovereign was backing the Fallon family. The more successful the Sovereign became, the more successful the Fallon and Cassidy families would be. They say there are millions of enemies hiding on Mount Reef. Is that true? Rachel asked. Most likely, Wayne said. Only one person is allowed to attend the summit. This is the perfect opportunity for our enemy to assassinate the Sovereign. They're doing everything they can to secure his death. The Sovereign knew his life would be at risk if he went, Helen said. But he didn't hesitate to go. He's completely different from that so-called former commander, Stephen. He handed over the drug to a foreign country without even thinking about it, just to save his own life. He's a disgrace. Her words resonated with the Cassidy family. Harry was indignant. The Sovereign is nothing like Stephen. Rome shook his head. Stephen isn't even qualified to be compared to the Sovereign in the first place. While the Sovereign's handling the crisis overseas, Stephen's busy running from his crime. The Cassidy family nodded in agreement. Kim didn't join in the discussion, but a sudden thought crossed her mind as she listened. Stephen and the Sovereign were overseas at the same time. Was this a coincidence? Kim stared at the blurry figure of the Sovereign on the screen. Did he look like Stephen? Or did he look like someone else? She couldn't tell from the terrible quality. But the Sovereign was like a god, invincible and divine. Even if Stephen had recovered, was he strong enough to be on par with the Sovereign? Valeria's voice pulled Kim from her thoughts. You're not allowed to slander my daddy. He's the Sovereign. He'll come back to take me and Mommy home. Kim patted her hair. Don't worry, Valeria. Daddy will be home before you know it. You're just a child, Harry scolded. What do you know? Stephen is a traitor. He can't be compared to the Sovereign. Kim, do you still not know how to raise your daughter properly? Rome asked. You're an adult. You need to set her straight. Her nonsense is an insult to the Sovereign, Rebecca added. Rachel stood up from her seat and walked up to Harry, Rebecca, and Rome, who were sitting next to each other. She looked them dead in the eye. How dare you disrespect Kim and her daughter? She couldn't reveal Stephen's identity, so she had to be careful with her words when she was teaching them a lesson. Rachel was younger than them, but she was an aristocrat. She could be as intimidating as her father if she wanted to be. Harry, Rebecca, and Rome were shaking in their boots. Valeria is a child. Mind your words. I don't want to hear things like that again. The three of them hurriedly nodded. Rachel went back to the couch and sat next to her father. She glanced at Kim from the corner of her eye. I wonder what he saw in her. I'm not sure she's worthy of him. She can't help him when he needs it the most. She doesn't even know he's in danger. Wayne sighed. Rachel, watch what you say. You and I both know that no one can help him. We're aristocrats, but we're not so different from his wife. None of us can provide the help he needs. Meanwhile, Stephen had made it to the depths of Mount Reef. It looked deserted, but he could sense his every movement was being watched. At the peak, two people separated from the crowd of representatives and retreated to a room filled with monitors. One of them was Adler, and the other was the boss of Vindictus. His code name was Odin. The room was located some distance away from Mount Reef. 9 large screens had been set up to cover the entire mountain. Each monitor displayed a different area. Right now, every screen was the same. The Sovereign was entering the mountain. I've just received an update, Odin said. The number of our allies on the mountain has reached 2 million. These 2 million people were martial artists, but even if they were ordinary, it would still take several days to get past them. The Sovereign's death was practically confirmed. Adler was the one who'd gathered them on the mountain. With his status and identity, he could make anything possible. He'd even gotten the representatives on his side. 2 million people? Adler asked. It's impossible for the Sovereign to escape. I heard the U.S. is broadcasting the summit using their satellites, Odin said. Which means their citizens are staring at a screen like us and watching a live broadcast? What could be better than watching their own sovereign perish with their own eyes? Once he falls, it won't be long until the U.S. is up for grabs. Pass on my order, Adler instructed. Tell our people to get ready to take action as soon as they see the Sovereign. Even if he's not killed at the beginning, we'll delay him as much as possible. And while we're at it, we might as well give the U.S. citizens another gift. We'll ruin the banner before we kill him off. Adler's order quickly spread throughout the mountain. Everyone was on high alert. Stephen had made it 3,000 feet up the mountain. He was getting closer to the first wave of ambush. He could feel his enemies multiplying around him. All of a sudden, a dense crowd emerged from where they'd been hiding and surrounded him. The banner from the Leviathan unit was attached to a pole. Stephen placed it in the dirt and faced the enemy. I've been waiting for you. After losing his martial arts and then regaining them, he didn't know how strong he'd become. The battle in the island state had hardly been a challenge. He could use this chance to train and assess how far his martial arts had progressed. Stephen glanced at the banner. On second thought, it would be better to take it with him in case it was damaged. He pulled it out of the ground and rushed into the crowd. His courage is commendable, Adler commented, watching the scene on the monitor. With his martial arts, it's a shame that he's willing to die for his country. He must have known that the summit is a trap. He could have refused. I really don't understand why he came. Warhawk's philosophy differed from the United States. They believed that one's life was more of a priority than the country's interests. If it was their representative in the Sovereign's place, they wouldn't have set foot in Cadus. The honor of their country wasn't as important as their own life. Odin laughed. That's how the U.S. educates their people. Their ideology that one should love one's country has been instilled into their heads since a young age. To put it bluntly, it's brainwashing. As a citizen of the U.S., they have to be prepared to give up everything for the sake of the country at any moment. It's a foolish way of thinking. So many ambitious youths suffered from it. Fortunately, I left the U.S. a long time ago. I was one of the few who wasn't blinded by their education. Adler found his explanation amusing. So that's why the U.S. is so stubborn. They had a chance to survive, but they insisted on sacrificing themselves. What's the point in saving the country if they're not around to see it? Their idiocy has been useful to us, though, Odin said. If it weren't for their flawed mindset, we wouldn't have succeeded in trapping the Sovereign on the mountain. It's too bad this method only works against the U.S. But that's enough, isn't it? Adler asked. What we want is to dispose of the Sovereign. He's a godlike existence who will perish today in Cadus. We'll witness his downfall with our own eyes. To kill the Sovereign, Adler had gone all out. Most of the 2 million martial artists stationed on the mountain were from the island state, Cadus and Warhawk. The island state's undying obsession hadn't changed for years. They had every intention of annexing the U.S. Cadus had many conflicts with the U.S. in the past. They didn't want to see them get any stronger. As for Warhawk, they viewed the U.S.'s success as their biggest threat. Of the 2 million martial artists, the weakest consisted of those who were one step away from reaching the Grandmaster realm. The rest were varying levels of the Grandmaster realm and martial Grandmasters. To deal the most impactful blow to the U.S., the countries overseas had revealed their trump cards. There was absolutely no chance for the U.S. to win. Even if the Sovereign wasn't killed, he would be heavily injured. Moreover, if he didn't make it to the peak in 5 hours, the U.S. would have to forfeit. At this time, Kylan, like the rest of the country, was paying attention to the Transatlantic Summit's satellite broadcast. But unlike ordinary citizens, he had connections that they didn't. He discovered the trap that Cadus had set up for the Sovereign. Kylan had been dumbfounded when the Leviathan unit told him that there were 2 million martial artists lying in ambush, wanting to get rid of the Sovereign. It was 1 against 2 million. If it were Kylan in the Sovereign's place, he would have been killed. but the chances weren't much better for the sovereign himself. Even if these 2 million people weren't martial artists, they were still a force to be reckoned with. Kylan admired the sovereign for venturing into enemy territory alone despite the high risks. But it was a shame because it hadn't been long since the sovereign had taken over his position. Before he had a chance to prove himself, he most likely would be killed across the ocean. Sylvie had the same thoughts. She and Kylan both instructed their subordinates to monitor the transatlantic summit in hopes that they could provide assistance where there was an opportunity. At Mount Wreath, the martial artists surged forward towards the sovereign in waves. There were so many of them that it was impossible to count them all. Adler and Odin were monitoring the situation. Adler pointed at the screen with a smug look on his face. "See how many people there are? They're not the most skilled martial artists I've recruited, but there's enough of them to overwhelm the sovereign. His cultivation is profound, but he's still human. He has his limits like the rest of us." Stephen held the banner and charged into the fray. He swerved through the crowd in a ray of light. Wherever he went, a small part of the densely packed crowd collapsed. His fist was like a blade. Blood sprayed when it came in contact with his opponents. In an instant, the ground was covered in corpses. Even then, Stephen found that he hadn't progressed by much. It felt like he hadn't taken a single step forward because there were so many people. More than 100 bodies littered the ground behind him, but as soon as they fell, another group took their place. It was like an assembly line that stretched on forever. Adler laughed as he watched the sovereign stuck in place. Even someone like him can't defeat a sea of people. His stamina will be drained by the time he gets to the other side. That is, if he makes it there at all, Odin said. Neither of them cared that the bodies of their allies were piling up on the ground. It didn't matter how many people they sacrificed, as long as their goal was achieved. Those 2 million people weren't worth that much. Their lives were being exchanged for the sovereign. That itself was an honor. As the fight continued, Stephen felt his tactic wasn't working. He was originally planning to force his way through, but the crowd was so dense that he'd barely made a dent. He decided to unleash more of his inner energy to increase the impact of his attacks. Stephen held out his hand, releasing a wave of energy that tore through the crowd of thousands. A path opened up. He wasted no time and dashed forward, traversing thousands of yards in the blink of an eye. Adler was stunned. What kind of martial arts is he using? I've never seen anything like it. He's the divine sovereign, Odin pointed out. It's a given that he has a few tricks up his sleeve. With that skill, he could travel hundreds of miles in a day on foot. If this continues, reaching the peak in 5 hours won't be difficult for him. Adler clicked his tongue. Damn it. Even with so many people, they couldn't stop one person. Inform our people to go all out. No matter what, they have to stop the sovereign. Don't let him take another step. That was Adler's order. But who could be capable of stopping Stephen when he could travel such long distances at only a few seconds? His aura surged as he swept through the crowd. His opponents were knocked back as he passed through at lightning speed. None of them had a chance to get close to him. Bodies fell around him, but it was like he didn't encounter anyone in his path. Through the satellite broadcast, the people of the U.S. could just make out a blurry figure unleashing a bright light that formed a path through the crowd. Everyone cheered. When the sovereign was officially given his position during the ceremony, there were many who doubted his qualifications because of his mysterious background. After this amazing display of martial arts, everyone was convinced that he deserved his position. The enemy had been relying on their numbers to overwhelm the sovereign, but now it was impossible for them to get close. Adler's expression turned serious as he watched the battle. This is ridiculous. Hundreds of thousands of people can't stop one person? Please be patient, Odin said. It looks like he's stronger than we thought. I have an idea. Why don't we switch our target? Are you talking about the banner? Yes. Attacking the sovereign directly is a waste of our manpower. The banner represents his country. He'll risk his life to protect it. Adler approved. As expected, Only someone who used to be a citizen of the U.S. would understand how their people think. The banner is the sovereign's burden, but he won't be able to give it up. As Stephen was advancing through the crowd, another group moved out. Unlike the previous groups, this one consisted of archers and snipers. The archers positioned their bows and aimed their arrows. A flame burned brightly at the tips. Their goal was to burn the banner. The snipers got into position and aimed their rifles, searching for the sovereign through the lens. Odin had his doubts when he saw Adler's deployment. Is this okay? There are so many people out there. It'll be hard for them to hit the target. It's precisely because there's so many people that we can cover it up, Adler said. If the area was barren, the sovereign would see through their attacks and deflect the arrows and bullets. The sovereign is fast, but if our archers and snipers can predict his position, they can catch him off guard. When he's busy defending the banner, the others will flock together and finish him off. His strategy was well thought out. Odin was impressed. He wondered if everyone from Warhawk was this talented at strategizing. Stephen sensed a presence that hadn't been there moments before. He filtered out the background noise and pinpointed the source. At that moment, a barrage of flaming arrows and bullets headed straight for him. Stephen had sensed their sneak attack and stopped abruptly. The arrows and bullets hit their own people, missing him by a landslide. Adler cursed. "Tell them to shoot again." "Wait a minute," Odin interjected. "The sovereign knows it's coming. There's no point because he'll dodge. We have so many people on our side, it'll only cause us more losses." His reasoning was sensible, so Adler retracted his order and instructed all of his people to shift their focus to the banner instead. The sovereign was shrouded in a veil of inner energy. No one could get close to him, but that wasn't the case for the banner. No matter how strong he was only one person. He would be forced to divert his attention to the banner. Like Adler had predicted, when the crowd started targeting the banner, Stephen was caught off guard. It had already been half an hour, and he hadn't been able to take another step forward because he was focusing all of his energy on preventing the banner from being damaged. He had no choice but to go on the offensive. The enemy's tactic of overwhelming him with their numbers had more of an effect now that his hands were tied. The people of the U.S. watched anxiously as the sovereign struggled. They prayed that he could hold on and move past this obstacle. Stephen had noticed the moment the enemy switched targets and aimed for the banner. He couldn't let it get damaged. He strapped the banner onto his back, so both of his hands were free. He felt much less restrained. With one punch, the group in front of him collapsed. This time, Stephen didn't use any energy-draining techniques. He cut through the waves with his fists alone, forcing his way through the crowd. He was well aware that to make it to the peak, he had to get rid of these people as quickly as possible. Every punch was packed with an explosive force that swept through groups of enemies. Soon, Stephen felt like he was back in his element again. He strode through the masses like there was no one in his way. Adler was fuming as he monitored the situation on the mountain from the monitors. According to his calculations, the sovereign shouldn't have been able to advance a single step, but he was tearing through the crowd like he wasn't hindered at all. Adler had lost at least 10,000 of his people, and the results were not satisfactory. "We can't be impatient," Odin advised. "Calm down and think about how to stop him." Adler took a deep breath to compose himself. "You're right. The sovereign goes beyond our expectations every time. Taking him down with our numbers alone isn't enough. 10,000 deaths are nothing to us. We have 2 million people on our side. They're stationed at different areas on the mountain." "Where are they?" Odin asked. Adler was personally leading the operation, so he didn't know all the details. Adler pointed at one of the monitors. "The next group is over there." The display flickered, and the screen switched to a canyon. There was a narrow path between two cliffs where only 3 to 5 people could pass through at a time. A dense crowd had squeezed themselves onto the path, beginning from the entrance. "There are 90,000 people there. I've already thought it through. On the ground, our methods are ineffective against the sovereign. But what about high ground? These people are snipers. The location they're in is ideal for taking him out. You're planning on trapping him in the canyon? Odin questioned. Yes. The path is narrow, and my people are crowding the only way up. If those at the front fall, the back will provide assistance. The Sovereign will waste a lot of his time here because in order to get to the top, he'll have to make it up the path. Even if all 90,000 of them are killed, it'll be impossible for him to get to the peak in time. As Adler changed his strategy, Stephen faced much less resistance. He made it out to the sea of people to the other side and found himself standing before a canyon, where another large group was waiting for him. There were so many of them that they blocked off an entire valley. Stephen estimated that their numbers weren't any less than the previous group. There might even be 10 times more. In such a narrow valley, no matter how high his cultivation base was, he wouldn't be able to display his full potential. This was a canyon, after all. He had the ability to turn a house into a pile of rubble with one punch, but a canyon was a geological structure. It couldn't be compared to a house. If he wanted to pass through, the only way up was to force his way through the crowd on the narrow path. But that would be a waste of time. Stephen looked around and suddenly had an idea. Adler was smirking as he watched the Sovereign arrive at the canyon's entrance. He ordered his people to move forward. No one was allowed to retreat. At that moment, a flash of light filled the screen, and the Sovereign disappeared. Adler blinked. He searched the screen for the Sovereign, but there was no one except for his people. Then, his gaze zeroed in on a silhouette scaling up the cliff of the canyon. It was the Sovereign, and he was moving fast. Adler's people couldn't believe their eyes. The cliff was so steep that they didn't think anyone could climb up without external assistance. Adler himself was even more shocked. He quickly ordered his people to snipe him down. Under his command, hundreds of snipers fired their rifles at the same time. Their bullets shot towards the Sovereign, but at the last minute, he nimbly dodged and resumed his climb. Adler gritted his teeth and ordered his people to bring out the cannons. More than a dozen anti-aircraft cannons were fired at the Sovereign. The cliff was riddled with holes, and rocks flew in all directions. In the midst of the chaos, Stephen leapt to the other side of the cliff and jumped onto the path below. His rapid descent caused a huge shockwave that knocked away the enemies at the top of the path. They teetered off the edge and plunged to their deaths. Stephen had made it to the top of the canyon, but there was another horde of people waiting for him. At this rate, he wouldn't be able to reach the peak in 5 hours. He considered his options. The only way to make it in time was to start a massacre. So far, Stephen hadn't revealed his sword. Although blood had been shed, not much destruction had occurred. If he started a massacre, the enemy would seize the opportunity to ruin his and the United States' reputation. But from the looks of it now, this concern had been completely unnecessary. The enemy was out to kill him. Being soft-hearted wouldn't get him to the top. Stephen pulled out the Imperial sword at his waist. Its radiant light blinded his enemies. They couldn't open their eyes or look directly at it. It had been forged a long time ago by a famous blacksmith using 2 special materials with opposite properties: extreme cold and extreme heat. The Imperial sword was a symbol of power during ancient times. It represented the strength of the country's leader. Stephen examined the blade. Its aura seemed to trigger a change in the heavens and the earth as it alternated between states of extreme cold and extreme heat. A bone-chilling wind swept over the enemy, sending a shiver down their spine. Stephen pointed the tip of the sword at the crowd. The Imperial sword is a symbol of authority. Dying by its blade is a fitting end for scum like you, don't you think? His sword didn't scare the enemy off. They came closer and surrounded him. Do you really think you can defeat us with a sword? Don't be naive. Hand over the banner and forfeit. That's the only way for you to survive. A wise man knows when to submit. Take your country's former commander, for example. Imitate him and you'll live a good life. Why do you work so hard for the country? What have they ever done for you? It was in their best interest to make the Sovereign surrender, but he refused to back down. I can't surrender. Billions of people are rooting for me, including the former commander. I can't let them down. Are you really not afraid of death? Stephen raised his sword. Enough chit-chat. Come on. Those who want to die, step forward. At the Cassidy family's residence, Helen was moved to tears by the sovereign's passionate speech. Did you hear that? That's the sovereign of our country, the person who carries our future on his shoulders. Stephen is nothing compared to him, Harry said. Wayne and Rachel weren't interested in their slander. They were too busy worrying about Stephen. As for Stephen, he'd made up his mind. He didn't hesitate to charge into the enemy with the Imperial sword in hand. His martial arts were deep and immeasurable. With the sword, he was almost invincible. Every slash dyed the earth with blood. In less than a minute, the ground was painted red, and corpses littered the ground. Death was everywhere. The number of bodies was more than 10,000. One person with only a sword was capable of such a large-scale massacre. The remaining hundreds of thousands of people hesitated. They stopped in their tracks. The blood on the sovereign's sword pooled in the ground in a steady stream. Stop making pointless sacrifices. If you leave now, I'll let you go. Otherwise, you'll end up like these corpses on the ground. They looked at each other before some of them broke away from the group and ran off. They knew the sovereign meant every word. The corpses on the ground were the best evidence. Adler had watched the entire battle on the monitor. He was not happy to see his people retreating. He ordered his snipers to shoot down any deserters. Everyone who retreated was killed. They had escaped from certain death at the sovereign's hands, only to be killed by their own people. This was a warning to the others. Anyone who retreated without permission would be killed. What should we do next? Odin asked. No one had expected the sovereign to be this strong. If they kept this up, the rest of their people would only become cannon fodder. We'll continue, Adler said. Many of our people have been killed, but we started with 2 million. There are 500,000 remaining. There's enough of them to drain the sovereign's energy and wear him down. Remember, no matter how strong the sovereign is, he's only one person. He's a human, not a god. When he's exhausted, we'll kill him off for good. Odin was unnerved by Adler's view on human lives. He was ruthless, but Adler was on another level. He treated 2 million of his own people like insects whose lives didn't matter. Their sole purpose was to send themselves to their deaths for the sake of achieving his goal. If it were Odin, he wasn't confident he'd be willing to sacrifice that many of his people for his own ambition. With the Imperial sword, Stephen's field of vision widened, but the number of enemies continued to increase. Tens of thousands would be killed, but tens of thousands more would replace them. It was like his enemy didn't have any shortage of manpower. Stephen took a deep breath. It seemed like he would be forced to wipe them all out and dye the sky red. After an entire hour passed, the ground was piled with mountains of corpses. From what Stephen could see, there were hundreds of thousands of them. He stood at the center of the slaughter. The banner on his back fluttered in the wind. His sword looked even more dazzling after absorbing the blood of his enemies. But unlike his sword, Stephen's uniform was tattered and covered in blood. Facing this many people was exhausting, even for him. He knelt on one knee, breathing hard. He pressed the tip of the blade into the ground to keep himself upright. See that? Adler asked Odin triumphantly. He's exhausted. I told you, he's a human, not a god. He gets tired like everyone else. This is the perfect chance to get rid of him. Adler issued another command. He ordered another 100,000 of his people to attack the sovereign. They would take advantage of his fatigue and kill him. Before Stephen could catch his breath, another endless stream of enemies rushed over. He got to his feet. All traces of his earlier exhaustion were gone. He charged into the enemy with his sword in hand. Another destructive battle broke out. Bodies fell with every swing. After 2 hours, Stephen was the only one left standing once again. The air was heavy with the stench of death. The rivers had turned red from the mountain of corpses trailing up Mount Reef. After getting through this wave, Stephen made it to the foot of the peak. He was just a short distance away from reaching the top. Once he inserted the banner at the summit, it would be the United States' victory. He alone had eliminated almost 1 million enemies. No one in the entire world could achieve such a feat except for the sovereign. The people of the U.S. were convinced of his strength. Whatever lingering doubts they had from the ceremony were swept away by this battle. Adler was astonished at the scene of the sovereign arriving at the foot of the mountain. More than half of his people had been eliminated. If he was from Warhawk, my country would be invincible. When the sovereign was appointed, the people doubted him because his background was kept confidential, Odin said. But not anymore. He's convinced all of them. But this should be the final battle. Adler smiled, glancing at the exhausted sovereign on the screen. His energy is on the verge of being depleted. The people he's killed so far were half a step away from the Grandmaster realm. I'll send out my strongest lineup, Grandmasters and Martial Grandmasters. This is for him. The sovereign will die here. After reaching the foot of the peak of Mount Reef, Stephen could see flat land ahead of him. He didn't have time to take a break. He trekked up the path without stopping for a breather. He didn't encounter anyone even when he reached the halfway point. Something wasn't right. Cadis had claimed that 2 million people had been deployed. He'd killed almost half of them, and he still had 2/3 of his strength left. It didn't make sense for no one to show up. He advanced carefully, keeping his eyes peeled for an ambush. All of a sudden, a chilling aura flooded the path. The air turned frigid as a dense crowd of martial artists appeared. Stephen was stunned to see so many Grandmasters and Martial Grandmasters. There were tens of thousands of them. Even the aristocratic families wouldn't be able to rally such a large group of advanced martial artists. He realized that this was their trump card. The previous group he'd killed were underlings who'd fought for the sole purpose of draining his energy. These people were here to finish him off. The martial artist in the lead emitted an aura that was on par with Dale's. You should have guessed the situation by now. Do you still plan on fighting? Why don't you surrender and leave the banner behind? If you do, I'll let you go. You've proved to the world that you're worthy of being the sovereign. Even if you leave the U.S., other countries will want to recruit you. He'd witnessed the sovereign wipe out more than 1 million people by himself, and there were still many more. He couldn't help but feel sympathetic for the sovereign's predicament. It'll be a pity for someone of your caliber to die for a country that's done nothing for you. Listen to my advice. Hand over the banner and join us. We'll treat you much better. Wherever you want to go, just name it, and Mr. Adler will make it happen. He could give you an island, a tribe, or even an independent country if that's what you want. Your martial arts are incredible. Why do you need to follow orders? You're risking your life to protect the people of the U.S., but what do they have to offer you? The satellite broadcast was blurry, but the people of the U.S. heard the enemy recruit the sovereign loud and clear. If the sovereign switched sides, his life would be spared, but he wouldn't be welcome in the country anymore. They waited nervously for his answer. After a brief silence, Stephen started laughing. In my dictionary, there's no such thing as betrayal or surrender. I fight for the U.S. and its people. How could people like you possibly understand? I'd rather die than betray my home. He was interrupted by a coughing fit. You're in no condition to continue, the leader of the group said. Are you sure you want to fight to the death with us? Stephen wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Come at me, all together. Fine. Don't blame me for not giving you a chance. The leader made the first move. He charged straight for Stephen. Sparks flew, and the air distorted from the violent collision. Stephen blocked the attack with his sword. You live up to your title, the leader remarked, jumping back. He held up a hand, signaling the rest of his group to take action. They lunged for Stephen in a cascade of brilliant light. They were relentless in their attacks. As the dust settled, the people of the U.S. couldn't see the sovereign anymore. Quite a few of them had teared up when he declared that he was still fighting for them. They prayed that it wasn't over. The leader of the group peered down at the area where Stephen was being buried alive. He shook his head in regret. The sovereign was a genius martial artist. It was a shame for him to have been killed. The elite martial artists had mutual respect for one another, and the leader of the group was no exception. With the sovereign's martial arts, Warhawk would have been invincible if he defected to their country. "There's no need to feel bad for him," someone said. "For someone as loyal as the sovereign, dying for his country is the most honorable ending." "You're right. The enemy will always be the enemy. Next year, I'll come back and visit his grave. I hope in his next life he won't be a citizen of the U.S. Before the leader of the group could finish his sentence, a blade plunged through his chest. A familiar voice rang out behind him. "I think it'd be more appropriate for me to come back next year and visit your grave." How are you? Surprised that I'm still alive?" Stephen pulled out his sword, and the leader of the group dropped to the ground, dead. The people of the U.S. cheered in front of their screens. The sovereign was alive. It wasn't over. There was still hope. Stephen turned around. "Now it's your turn." He swung his blade at the tens of thousands of martial artists, releasing a wave of energy that swept through their group. It wasn't until hundreds of them collapsed that they regained their senses. It had happened so fast that they didn't have time to react. They assumed an offensive position, bracing themselves for a direct confrontation. "Kill the sovereign!" someone shouted. "We can't let him pass." With that, they launched their counterattacks. The battle involved grandmasters and martial grandmasters. The entire mountain was on the verge of an earthquake from the intensity of the fight. The trees rustled and the ground shook. Dust and smoke were everywhere. As the battle dragged on, the grandmasters fell first. Then it was the martial grandmasters. But Stephen wasn't faring much better. Blood flowed from his wounds. Even so, the banner on his back was as pristine as when the Leviathan unit had first handed it to him. The remaining martial grandmasters were heavily injured. "He's too strong," one of them said. "It's like the more he fights, the stronger he gets. If we don't kill him now, no one else will be able to." His words received a unanimous response from everyone else. They unleashed their strongest techniques without holding back. The terrain was altered by their destructive force. Even the century-old chalets at the peak of the mountain were affected. One by one, they began to collapse. The participants of the transatlantic summit panicked and fled in all directions. Several of them were killed in the stampede. Adler was in disbelief. The sovereign was insane. If this continued, the entire mountain would be razed to the ground. As the battle intensified, the remaining martial grandmasters began to falter. A jagged ridge had formed on the side of the mountain from their fight. The forests were engulfed in a sea of fire. Soon, Stephen was the only one left standing amidst the destruction. Mount Wreath had become a battlefield. Flames roared around him, and the smoke blocked out the sun. The rivers were red, and bodies were piled like miniature mountains. It was like a scene straight out of hell. Stephen knelt on the blood-stained ground, losing his grip on his sword. It clattered and split in half. Even the imperial sword, which had survived erosion and passed down for thousands of years, had broken from the intense battle. Stephen gasped for breath, holding himself up with shaky arms. The people of the U.S. didn't have a clear view of the situation, but they did see the sovereign on his knees. They grew increasingly worried. "Is the sovereign from hell or heaven?" Adler asked in surprise. Most of the martial artists he'd gathered were from the island state and Cadis, not Warhawk. He could care less about their lives, but losing this many people in such a short amount of time frustrated him. "Who knows? Either way, he's at his limit," Odin said. "We should finish him off." "No, I've thought of a more effective method." "And that is?" Adler pointed at the monitor. "Be patient, you'll find out in a minute." Odin turned his attention to the screen. Over 10,000 grandmasters and martial grandmasters had fallen, but Adler still had the upper hand in numbers. Another dense crowd surged towards the sovereign. Before they had a chance to attack, he collapsed on his side. The banner on his back whipped wildly in the wind. They surrounded his prone form, and the leader of the group came forward. "You may be skilled, but this was always going to be your ending. The U.S. is fated to lose today. Why did you risk your life meaninglessly?" Stephen laid on his side, staring blankly at the blurry figure standing in front of him. He couldn't lift a finger. Everything hurt. Someone was talking to him, but the voice was muffled. He couldn't make out the words. In a daze, he peered up at the person through bleary eyes. The leader of the group looked down at the sovereign with a smirk. "I won't kill you yet. This banner's important to you, right? It's so valuable that you're willing to risk your life for it. Even if you die, you have to place it on the summit. It's too bad, but I can't let you do that. I'll make you watch as I ruin this banner with my own hands." "Mr. Adler, you come up with the best plans," Odin praised. "The sovereign risked his life to protect the banner. His will to fight will be crushed if it's destroyed." "It'll be a historic moment," Adler said. "Edit the video later. I want to air it on TV to let the world know that the sovereign isn't invincible. No one is a match for me." The people of the U.S. couldn't look away from their screens. The sovereign had reached his limit, and the banner was about to be ruined. It wouldn't just be a disgrace to the supreme leader. Having the banner that represented the country destroyed by the enemy would drive the United States' reputation to the ground. Wayne and Rachel waited anxiously for Stephen to get up. He was ridiculously strong. He'd already gotten through more than half of the 2 million people on the mountain. Just a little more, and he would make it to the peak. He couldn't die here. He'd made a promise to return in 3 months. The leader of the group continued to mock the sovereign when he didn't respond. "Don't you have anything to say? Are you just going to watch me ruin the banner you tried so hard to protect?" The sovereign didn't move or speak. His gaze was distant and unfocused. The leader snickered. "If you can't get up, then watch me destroy the banner from down there." He reached out to grab the banner. Suddenly, someone seized his wrist. That was when he realized that the sovereign had vanished from where he'd been lying on the ground and reappeared next to him. Stephen crushed the leader's meridians and turned his arm to ash. Sylvie brightened at the sight of the sovereign on his feet again. She was the only one who knew of his past achievements. He wouldn't go down so easily. Kylan was stunned. Just how strong was the sovereign? He had to have reached the Divine Grandmaster realm. The people of the U.S. cheered as the sovereign reappeared on the screen. He had yet to fall. Adler's people were in shock. The sovereign had been at the end of his rope just moments before. Where did this sudden burst of strength come from? Adler and Odin were also surprised. They were seconds away from achieving their goal. The sovereign was like a cat with 9 lives. Stephen tossed the leader's body aside and faced the rest of the group. "Sorry to disappoint you, but I can still fight." Adler was enraged. He shouted into his earpiece. "Stop standing around! Kill him! Now!" At his command, they rushed towards Stephen. Both parties clashed together. Stephen swept through the waves. Not a single person could stop him. Adler felt nothing as he watched his people be killed off. He still had many more. The sovereign could still fight, but that didn't change the fact that he was exhausted. Sure enough, the sovereign revealed an opening in his defense. He took a heavy hit to the back. But he didn't stay down for long. He stood up again with the broken sword in his hand and leaped into the fray. He took another hit and coughed up blood, but that still didn't stop him. Eventually, every part of him was covered in wounds. His uniform was soaked in blood, and his mask had long since been dyed red. As the battle progressed, the sovereign inched closer to the peak. Adler slammed his fist on the table. "Damn it! I've lost more than 1 million people, and he's still alive and kicking! He's only one person. Why isn't he dead yet?" Odin was fixated on the screen. "It's raining." A storm descended on Mount Wreath. The downpour turned the path muddy and washed the blood and corpses to the foot of the mountain. Adler laughed at the fortunate turn of events. The heavens are in my favor. The rainstorm came at the perfect time. I still have 400,000 people left. They're stationed near the peak. The Sovereign won't make it to the summit. Stephen's uniform was drenched from the rain. It clung to his skin uncomfortably, but he pressed on. This was the final stretch. The last group of enemies was densely packed on the path up ahead. Stephen didn't hesitate to charge into the crowd. He almost slipped up from the rain and mud, but he kept going. He couldn't lose here. He had to place the banner at the summit within 5 hours. As the battle dragged on, Stephen felt lightheaded, and his body was heavy. He didn't feel any pain when his opponent landed a hit on him. He felt like he was on autopilot. Every time he fell, he got back up. "Did you notice?" Odin asked. "Every time the Sovereign gets back on his feet, his attacks feel stronger." Adler thought about it. "Yeah, but how's that possible?" "I don't know either. No one knows where the Sovereign came from. If we knew his origins, it would be much easier to investigate his identity." Unbeknownst to anyone else, Stephen was getting stronger throughout the battle because of the technique that the priest had taught him. Whenever he suffered a grievous injury, the technique would activate itself and heal him. It also increased his strength by a large margin. This was what he was relying on to make it to the summit. The martial artists at the peak were killed. Blood mixed with the rainwater and flowed down the mountain path in rivers. Corpses were washed to the edge of the cliffs before plunging to the depths below. The people of the U.S. saw the Sovereign reach the peak and head straight for the summit. Odin glanced at the time. "There's still half an hour left. We can't get him up there and put the banner at the summit at the same time." "I still have more than 10,000 people left," Adler said. "They'll stall for time while I get my secret weapon ready. I wasn't planning on using it, but my people are more incompetent than I expected." Odin didn't know a secret weapon existed. He thought those 2 million people were it. Odin was the boss of Vindictus, but his schemes couldn't be compared to Adler's. He couldn't keep up with him. Stephen could already see the summit from where he was. He knew that his enemy would go out as a last-ditch effort to stop him. As he'd predicted, the remaining 10,000 martial artists guarded the highest point of the mountain, unleashed numerous techniques with a severe backlash. But it was impossible to stop Stephen. His eyes were on the goal. It was right in front of him. He unleashed an ultimate technique of his own. His opponents fell one after another. The summit looked like it had been bombarded with cannonballs. Deep craters littered the ground. "If gods existed, the Sovereign would be one of them," Odin said. "He never ceases to surprise me." Adler watched the Sovereign cough up blood from using too much of his inner energy. "So what if he's a god? Nothing lasts forever. Even gods fall. He's killed off at least 2 million of my people, but I don't think he can make it to the summit in time." The last of the enemy fell at Stephen's feet. There were no more obstacles in his path. He was a few steps away from the summit. All he had to do was walk up there and place the banner at the highest point. He took a step forward, but it was like all his strength drained out of him. He fell to his knees. He tried to get back up, but his legs didn't listen to him. "See what I told you?" Adler said proudly. "His biggest enemy is himself." Odin stared at the screen, deep in thought. The people of the U.S. grew restless at the Sovereign's futile attempts to stand. They prayed for him. As if their prayers reached him, Stephen shifted and tried a different approach. If he couldn't walk there, then he could at least drag himself to the highest point. Adler frowned. He'd underestimated the Sovereign's willpower, but that didn't matter. He still had his secret weapon. At the summit, Stephen was about to muster the rest of his strength to place the banner at the highest point when he spotted a group of soldiers wearing armor nearby with rocket launchers slung over their shoulders. They aimed and fired at him. The missiles weaved through the air, heading straight for him. Stephen rolled out of the way, dodging just in time as the place where he just was blasted into a deep crater. A wave of energy surged within him. As the soldiers readied their launchers for another round, Stephen landed behind one of them and threw him to the ground. The others didn't care if their ally was in the way. They opened fire in his direction. Stephen leapt into the air, avoiding the attack. As for the unlucky soldier, he was blasted into smithereens by his own people. Another round of missiles ensued. Stephen landed and dodged as he ran toward another soldier. He knocked him down and snatched his rocket launcher. He fired at the other soldiers. Because of their armor, they weren't injured, but the impact had knocked them off their feet. Just as they were about to stand, Stephen rushed up at them at the speed of light. He swung his fist, smashing their faces beyond recognition. In an instant, Adler's secret weapon had been destroyed. The soldiers had been from Warhawk. But he didn't care about them. He cared about their armor. They were high-tech products that had been developed after years of extensive experimentation. "It's over," Odin said in despair. Adler's secret weapon had been proven useless, and its 2 million people had been annihilated. Odin had been carefully planning this operation for a long time. It seemed like it would end in a crushing defeat. "Who says we're finished?" Adler motioned to the monitor. "We've gone all out, and the Sovereign is still alive, but he's at his limit." Odin's gaze shifted to the screen. The Sovereign was on his knees again. He was only a few steps away from the highest point, but he had no energy left to place the banner there. "There's 1 more minute," Adler said. "This is the United States' loss." The seconds ticked by. Mount Wreath was deathly silent as the rain washed the bloodshed away. The only signs of the intense battle remaining were the corpses scattered throughout the mountain. The people of the U.S. sat quietly in front of their screens. The Sovereign never stood up again. 2 million people had been defeated, but the U.S. still lost. Cadis had set a time limit. The banner had to be placed at the summit within 5 hours. "The Sovereign is strong, but it's pointless if he can't fulfill his mission," Adler said. Odin checked the time. "There's still 30 seconds left." 30 seconds is nothing. When the time is up, we'll announce to the public that this is the United States' loss. Adler could already imagine the newspapers and magazines reporting on the U.S.'s failure. To deal such a big blow to one of the strongest countries in the world was an incredible accomplishment. He could use this achievement and enter the core circles of Warhawk. The countdown began. The people of the U.S. kept their eyes on the TV, hearts pounding. The final 30 seconds were filled with tension. Just as the countdown was about to reach 0, an unbelievable scene appeared on the screen. "Hold on. Look, what's that?" At the highest point of Mount Wreath, a banner with a dragon fluttered in the wind. The Sovereign had managed to make it to the highest point. The people of the U.S. were in an uproar. The Sovereign had done it. Regardless of the reason the transatlantic summit had been held, the U.S. was now at the top of the world. A frenzy of patriotism swept over the country. "I've never been prouder of my identity as a citizen of the United States. No one in the world could have done what the Sovereign did. I have no regrets. The U.S. will always be my home." Every citizen was proud of their identity, and it was the Sovereign who had made this unity possible. Wayne and Rachel were moved to tears. They knew how hard it was to break through the blockade of 2 million people more than anyone. None of the aristocratic families would have been capable of such a feat. The Cassidy family cheered. Aside from being proud of their identity as citizens, they were delighted by their future prospects. The Sovereign had a close connection with the Fallon family, which they were now a part of. The more successful the Sovereign was, the more successful the Fallon and Cassidy families would be. Adler couldn't believe it. He almost lost control. How is this possible? Tell me this isn't real. Odin tried to calm him down. This is reality. The Sovereign managed to place the banner at the summit within 5 hours. He didn't want to accept it either, but they couldn't ignore the truth. Adler glowered at the Sovereign on the screen. In other words, the U.S. won. I gathered representatives from countries around the world and 2 million martial artists, but it was pointless. The most humiliating part about this is that we lost to one person. I can't accept this. The U.S. has won, but the Sovereign has to die. But we don't have anyone left, Odin pointed out. What other tricks could Adler possibly have? We don't have anyone else, but we're not all out of secret weapons. Odin gave him a confused look, but Adler kept him in suspense. He took out his phone and made a call. A huge armored vehicle appeared on the screen. Odin's eyes were drawn to the massive weapon of war occupying the entire vehicle. Is that a missile? That's right, Adler confirmed. The entire mountain will be razed to the ground once it's launched, including the Sovereign. This is crazy, Odin exclaimed. What about the representatives and the rest of our people who weren't involved in the battle? They're still on the mountain. We need to evacuate them. Vindictus's only goal was to eliminate the United States. It wasn't necessary to drag the representatives and the others into the crossfire. Forget about them, Adler said. I want to catch the Sovereign off guard so he's unprepared. Are you going to bury all those innocent people with the Sovereign? Adler snorted. Who asked them to be unlucky? What I want right now is to erase all traces of life on Mount Reef. If they want to blame someone, then they can blame the Sovereign. He immediately gave the order to fire. Just as the people of the U.S. were immersed in their excitement, a missile was launched from the other side of the mountain. A deafening explosion took place at the summit of Mount Reef. The mountain collapsed, and a cloud of smoke rose into the sky. The people who had yet to retreat screamed and ran for their lives, but they were ultimately buried underneath the rubble. The mountain was like hell on earth. It burned for hours. Mount Reef, which had been reputed to be the highest mountain range in Cadiz, was turned into a wasteland by a destructive weapon of war. It was razed to the ground. The banner was gone from the highest point, and everyone who was on the mountain was blasted to pieces. The Sovereign was nowhere to be seen. The mountain had been hit by a missile after all. It was equivalent to 1,000 tons of explosives, and it had hit the summit at a precise angle. The Sovereign had been at the center of the explosion. There was no chance of survival. The people of the U.S. fell into silence. The satellite broadcast was blurry to begin with. Now it was covered by a thick veil of smoke, making it impossible to access the situation clearly. They didn't know where the explosion had come from, but it was obvious that the Sovereign was in trouble. Kylan and Sylvie were infuriated by the turn of events. Only Warhawk would think of something like blasting the mountain with a missile. They were despicable through and through. The Supreme Leader had watched the broadcast as well. As the highest authority in the U.S., he was well aware that a missile had been dropped on the mountain. It would be a huge loss for the country if Stephen perished. He instructed the Leviathan unit to search for him. He wouldn't believe that he was dead until they found his body. The smoke surrounding Mount Reef didn't let up until 6 or 7 hours later. The once magnificent mountain range was long gone. It was now a pile of rubble. Several people were searching through the ruins. Corpses were strewn all over. None of them were intact. Adler and Odin had sent their people to search for the Sovereign's body. Adler had launched a missile, but he was still worried. He had to make sure that the Sovereign was really dead. After hours of extensive searching, their people found a broken sword, a broken mask, and a tattered coat, but there was no sign of the Sovereign's body. His uniform and personal belongings were ruined from the blast, Odin analyzed. I doubt the Sovereign's alive. His corpse is probably buried in the ruins. Who can survive a missile? It can destroy an entire city. After much convincing, Adler began to believe that the Sovereign was really dead. Make an announcement that the Sovereign has perished on Mount Reef. More than 2 million people had died on the mountain, but what did that matter? In the grand scheme of things, their sacrifices were worth it. The Sovereign was dead. He'd accomplished his goal. Soon, news of the Sovereign's death spread to every corner of the world. Is it really true? The leader of the Leviathan unit asked his team. They nodded. Yes, Mount Reef is in ruins. Warhawk sent their people to investigate, and they found the broken Imperial sword, shattered royal mask, and the tattered coat. Under these circumstances, the logical conclusion is that the Sovereign is deceased. The leader of the unit was silent for a long time. He finally sighed and said, It's my fault. I shouldn't have agreed to let him attend the transatlantic summit. What's happened can't be undone. The sovereign will always be the greatest honor of our country." The Leviathan unit was filled with grief. This time, it wasn't a fake death. Stephen was really dead. Kylan and Sylvie were similarly distraught by the news. There was also a downcast atmosphere at the Cassidy family's residence. Because of their connection with the Fallon family, they had received the news earlier than ordinary citizens. Warhawk had fired a missile in the direction of Mount Wreath. It hadn't been easy for them to find a backer like the Sovereign for their family. It was disappointing that he had died before they had even had a chance to meet him. Kim had an ominous feeling as she read the news. She couldn't stop thinking about Stephen. The timing of his trip overseas and the Sovereign's arrival at the transatlantic summit overlapped. Valeria started crying and interrupted Kim from her spiraling thoughts. "Daddy's gone. He lied to me. He said he would bring us home, but he's never coming back." Kim picked Valeria up and comforted her. She didn't know what to think. During the ceremony and the broadcast of the summit, Valeria had pointed at the Sovereign and called him her father multiple times. If he was dead, then Stephen was also dead. The Cassidy family wasn't in the mood to correct Valeria. She was just a child, and they were grieving over the loss of the Sovereign. How could a peerless hero like the Sovereign be compared to that useless son-in-law of their family? "Stop crying," Rebecca scolded impatiently. "Your father isn't dead." Valeria turned to look at her with hopeful eyes. "Really?" Rebecca had originally been planning on setting her straight, but that didn't seem appropriate given the atmosphere. So instead, she bent down and smiled at Valeria. "It's true. Why would Auntie lie to you?" "Your father will come back," Helen added. When her great-grandmother said the same thing, Valeria stopped crying. She looked up at Kim. "Mommy, is that true?" Kim patted Valeria's head and gave her a hug. "It's true. Daddy will be back soon. Then the three of us will go home together." Wayne and Rachel watched the Cassidy family with a heavy heart. Stephen wouldn't be coming back. The Sovereign was dead, which meant that Stephen was also dead. Wayne almost couldn't resist the urge to walk over there and tell them that the Sovereign was the Cassidy family's son-in-law whom they kept looking down on. Rachel quietly pulled her father back with tears in her eyes. They left the house to have a private conversation. "This isn't the right time," Rachel reminded him. Wayne let out a sigh. "You're right. The Sovereign just died. The rest of the world is waiting for an opportunity to attack us. If his identity is revealed, his wife and daughter will be in danger." "The Sovereign isn't around anymore, but we're still here," Rachel said. "We should hold a funeral for him." The two of them looked up at the sky. It was a bright, sunny day with no clouds in sight. "Mr. Adams, I promise that as long as our Fallon family exists, we'll ensure the safety of your family," Wayne said. "We'll protect your wife and daughter." "Rest in peace," Rachel murmured. Before Stephen went to Cadis, he'd left them with responsibilities. Being entrusted with an important task was a feeling they'd never experienced before when they were in seclusion. "Rachel, I've made up my mind. I'll be making an announcement that the Fallon family will stay in Washington, D.C. We've submitted to the Sovereign because of his strength, but after what we witnessed today, my respect for him is genuine." "Are you sure about this?" Rachel asked. The announcement would be an official declaration that the Fallon family was on the United States' side. The hierarchy of the hidden clans would change. "I'm certain. I know you respect the Sovereign as I do. I'll let you take care of this. Also, tell Mr. Dale about our plans. I'm sure he'll agree." Back at the Cassidy family's residence, Rebecca wasn't pleased when Valeria's mood shifted so quickly. "This world is so unfair. The Sovereign protected our country, but what did Stephen do?" Helen's gaze was fixed on the TV, even though the broadcast was over. "Heroes never live long. They always die young." 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Mount Wreath had long since been reduced to ruins by a missile. Fallen trees, piles of rubble, and burnt corpses were everywhere. This human purgatory was abandoned and became a forgotten land. But the Leviathan unit had appeared in the desolate place to search for the sovereign. They were divided into groups of 2s and 3s and scattered across the ruins, using detection tools to search the rubble. The sovereign was dead, but they couldn't leave his body to rot in the foreign wilderness. In the beginning, they had hoped that his body would turn up sooner or later. By some miracle, they hoped that he was alive. But they'd been searching for 3 days. This was the 5th batch of members from the Leviathan unit that the officials had sent over. Mount Wreath was Cadis's territory. To prevent drawing attention to themselves, their time was limited. Each group only had half a day to search. The 5th group hadn't had much luck either. This is the 3rd day. If we can't find his body today, there's a high possibility that we never will. The group fell silent at the leader's words. They couldn't accept that the sovereign was no more. "Wait, look over there!" someone exclaimed, pointing in the distance. The group turned to look. There was a flagpole in the middle of the scorched earth. It stood tall and proud amidst the destruction. The banner wasn't there. It must have burnt to ashes. The flagpole was on the verge of collapse, but it was still stable. Not even the wind could knock it down. The leader saluted the very object that the sovereign had risked his life to protect. The rest of the group followed his lead. The sovereign had died in battle, but the hope of the country remained. They knew that there was no point in continuing the search. Warhawk had launched a missile at the summit. The sovereign was only one person, and he was human. It was impossible for him to have survived. Kylan was in a daze when he received the news from the front lines. Was this it? Was the sovereign really dead? He held great respect for the sovereign. His early demise was unfortunate. The supreme leader was holding a meeting with the highest-ranking officials of the country. They didn't want to believe it either, but the sovereign was human. No one could survive the impact of a missile. The sovereign's death has set our military's progress back by 50 years. In the name of the highest officials of the U.S., announced that the sovereign had passed. He will be granted the title Martyr of the United States. We'll be holding a national burial for him. We'll show the world that even if he's dead, his spirit will always remain. The moment the announcement was made, the entire world heard about it. The sovereign was officially dead. Adler laughed when he read the announcement in the news. He crumpled the newspaper and tossed it on the floor. He dialed Odin's number. "Have you heard what's going on in the U.S.? "Yes. Do you have any orders for me?" Odin asked expectantly. "I do. The U.S. sees the sovereign as a hero, but it won't be for long." The day after the U.S. officials made the announcement, the mainstream media agencies overseas had a different voice. They claimed that at the beginning of the transatlantic summit, the representatives had reached an agreement for a peaceful unification of their respective countries. After the sovereign arrived, he didn't agree with their decision. He wanted to maintain the territorial disputes, so he tried to use force to make the representatives submit to him. The summit turned chaotic, and the representative had no choice but to retaliate in self-defense. They worked together and paid a huge price to kill the sovereign. The U.S. was stunned by the news, but before they could process the information, Cadis's biggest newspaper agency released a front-page headline that confirmed the previous claims. All of a sudden, the international public turned chaotic. They blamed the sovereign for abusing his authority to take over the United States' neighboring countries. The countries overseas that had always been at odds with the U.S. seized the opportunity to criticize them. The people of the U.S. were also engaged in heated discussion. "They're slandering our sovereign. It's obvious that they're the ones who set up the trap for him. They killed him, and they're even making false accusations. This can't be tolerated." Soon, protests were on the rise across the country, demanding justice for the sovereign. The officials were as infuriated as the citizens, but the sovereign was dead. There was no evidence, so they could only try to calm the people down for the time being. They wanted justice for the sovereign more than anyone, but this wasn't the right time. However, they didn't sit back and do nothing. To express their dissatisfaction, they held a national burial of the highest standard for the sovereign. The country was under martial law for 3 days as the people mourned for their deceased leader. The national burial attracted the attention of the entire world. The countries overseas that were on good terms with the U.S. sent their officials to attend the burial. As for the hostile countries, they kept an eye on the U.S., waiting for a chance to attack. The world shifted its focus to the United States. No one paid attention to the desolate wasteland that Mount Wreath had become. Underneath the ruins and the scorched earth, cracks spread across the center of the rubble like a spiderweb. The ground burst, and a figure was swept away by the ocean waves. It was sunset in a seaside town in Cadiz. Most of the fishermen had gone home, enjoying a pleasant evening with their families after a tiring day. There were families where husbands had gone out to sea in hopes of a prize catch and hadn't returned since. In one household, the husband left early and returned late in the evening. He came back later than the other fishermen. His wife had grown used to this kind of lifestyle. She would prepare dinner before heading out with her daughter for a walk on the beach. When her husband came back, they would head home and have dinner together. Today, the husband's wife and daughter were on the beach, waiting for him to come home. The little girl was lively and energetic. She ran around the beach, keeping a lookout for any seashells. "Slow down, be careful not to fall," the mother shouted behind her. Her daughter skidded to a stop and pointed at the shoreline. "Mom, there's a big shell over there." She ran over, examined her find, and turned back around. She pointed again. "Mom, it's a person." Her mother hurried over. The ocean was dangerous, and there were many instances of fishermen heading out to sea and never coming back. Her husband hadn't returned yet, and that worried her. What if that person was him? She came closer. Her daughter really had spotted a person lying on the beach. His clothes were tattered, and he was covered in wounds. She couldn't make out his face from all the dried blood, but she knew it wasn't her husband. She relaxed, but only slightly. This man didn't look like a fisherman who'd gone out to sea. What if he was a wanted criminal? If he was wounded while escaping capture, that would explain why he'd washed up on a beach, covered in blood. There had been rumors circulating among the fishermen recently. There was a dangerous criminal on the loose. This man could very well be the criminal the officials were searching for. She cast another cautious glance at the young man. His hair fell over his face as an ocean breeze swept over the shore. The waves pulled up to the beach, crashing against his back. Blood seeped into the ebbing tide before disappearing into the ocean. He was unresponsive. If it weren't for the faint rise and fall of his chest, she would have thought he was dead. All of a sudden, his fingers twitched, and his eyes fluttered open. She barely managed to suppress a scream. She picked up her daughter and ran across the beach back to the house. For a moment, Stephen didn't know where he was. He heard the distant cry of a seagull and the gentle sound of the ocean waves. He blinked to clear his blurry vision. It took a minute for his surroundings to come into focus. He saw a person running in the distance. Stephen rolled onto his back and stretched out his hand to the setting sun. His wounds were healing, and the bleeding had already stopped. He started laughing, but it was empty and hollow. By a stroke of luck, he was still alive. He'd survived the weapon of war. He didn't know if this was a blessing or a curse. When Stephen saw the missile targeting the summit, he thought it was the end. He knew that the only reason he survived was because of the technique that the priest had taught him. He had thought the 10th level was the end, but during the battle on Mount Wreath, he realized there was a higher level. The unexpected missile when he was on the brink of death became the opportunity for him to break through. Right before the missile landed, he'd been drained of his inner energy, but now he could feel it recovering inside him at a rapid pace. He felt stronger than ever. His body was resilient enough to survive the destructive impact of a missile. Stephen pushed himself off the sand and looked around. That person he saw running off must have seen him. He couldn't stay here. He had to find a safe place to hide and recover. He'd broken through to the next level, but being hit by a missile was still traumatic to his body. He'd almost died of it, and his internal injuries would take some time to recover. By the time the woman came back with her husband, they were greeted by an empty beach. "Where did he go? I could have sworn he was lying here." "Maybe someone else found him," the husband reasoned. "Let's report this to the authorities. If he was a wanted criminal, we might be rewarded for finding him." Before leaving the beach, Stephen tried to wash off as much blood as he could. It was getting late, but a few people were still on the beach. One of them had left their clothes and shoes behind on the sand and gone for a swim in the ocean. Stephen swiped the clothes when no one was looking and changed into them once he was out of sight. He disposed of his bloody uniform and left the beach. He made his way to the streets and blended into the crowd. It turned out he'd washed up in a prosperous coastal town in Cadiz. There were many police officers patrolling the streets, and no one would expect the sovereign to have washed up in a small town by the sea and pretended to be a person from Cadiz. There were wanted posters of the sovereign pasted on the walls. There was a picture of him in uniform and wearing the royal mask. He was thought to be dead, but Cadiz wanted to be careful. Mount Wreath was in their territory, so they had to make sure he hadn't survived somehow. Stephen went over to one of the newspaper stands. The headline was hard to miss, and the caption was even more eye-catching. The representatives of the Transatlantic Summit agreed on a plan to coexist peacefully. The divine sovereign of the United States disagreed and tried to use force to make them submit. In the end, he killed everyone on the mountain and then himself to preserve the chaos. Stephen almost crumpled the front page in his anger, but he remembered where he was and smoothed the newspaper, putting it back on the stand. Adler Robinson from Warhawk, Vindictus, Cadiz, and the island state had conspired against him, and even after his supposed death, they wouldn't leave him alone. He was about to walk away when two passerbys came over to read the newspaper. "Fortunately, the sovereign is dead. Otherwise, the world would have been in chaos because of him. It would have been a disaster if he survived. I don't understand what the United States is thinking. They're holding a national burial for someone like him. Different paths lead to different goals. The U.S. are a bunch of barbarians. They're nothing like Cadiz." Their words were unpleasant, but Stephen didn't care. It was a good thing for the world to think that he was dead. He would be safe for the time being. No one would expect a dead man to still be alive. The town by the sea was a popular tourist attraction, and it was a great place to take a vacation for the people of Cadiz. There were many vacation homes that they'd purchased for their yearly stay. Stephen decided to hide out in one of the vacation homes. The mansion was locked with a password and had a security system, but that wasn't an issue for him. He bypassed the security and slipped inside. He did a quick search around the house to make sure no one was home. It was dusty, and it didn't seem like anyone had lived there for a long time. Stephen found a small box on one of the shelves and took out a banner from his pocket. Right before the missile had hit, he'd grabbed the banner and hid it inside his clothes. He'd washed off the stains on the beach, and it had dried during his walk around town. He folded it and placed it neatly inside the box. The banner represented the people's hope. He had to bring it back in one piece. Stephen placed the box on a nightstand in one of the bedrooms. He washed up in the luxurious bathroom and headed to bed. To martial artists, meditating was the simplest and most effective way to recover. He sat cross-legged on the bed and closed his eyes, entering a meditative state of mind. If he did this for a few hours every day, he would be in better shape within 3 to 5 days. A few hours earlier, a couple had gone to the police and informed them they'd found a young man covered in blood on the beach. They described his appearance in great detail. In an alley not too far away, a group of people listened in on their conversation. "Someone spotted him," one of them said worriedly. "We have to tell him as soon as possible." They made their way to a wealthy neighborhood of vacation homes on the other side of town. "Are you sure this is the right place?" "It has to be. It's off-season right now, so this is the safest hiding place." They split up and began to search. Half an hour of meditation did wonders for Stephen's condition. He felt much better than when he had first woken up on the beach. His strength was slowly returning. In the middle of his meditation, he heard a commotion outside. He didn't think too much of it. It didn't matter as long as they weren't here for him. The sound of knocking came from the entrance. Stephen opened his eyes. Maybe these people were here for him. He slid off the bed and hid behind the closet. He could sense their auras from the bedroom. They were Grand Masters. He was feeling better, but he'd rather not get into a fight if he didn't have to. It would affect his recovery. There were wanted posters of the Sovereign across Cadiz. If he were exposed, it would be difficult for him to leave the country. The knocking continued. It was louder this time. "Is anyone inside?" someone called out. Stephen didn't answer. He heard their conversation from the bedroom. "We've searched most of the mansions. No one was there. This is the only house where I sensed a presence. He might be in there." "Break down the door. Time is of the essence." The front door was kicked open, and a large group of people flooded into the house. Stephen sighed inwardly. It seemed like a fierce battle would be unavoidable. With so many people, he was seconds away from being discovered. Just as they filed into the bedroom, he stepped out from behind the closet, bracing himself for a fight. "Mr. Sovereign, please wait a minute." "You know who I am?" Stephen asked, lowering his hand. "Yes, we've been keeping an eye on you since you came to Cadiz." "Why? Who are you?" "We're from the Oceanic clan." Stephen had heard of them before. There were rumors that during the chaotic battle within the aristocratic families back then, there were some who didn't want to get involved. They left the U.S. and sailed across the ocean to establish their own family. It was difficult to adapt to life at sea, but they persisted and maintained their family for many generations. They had once been a part of the hidden clans, so their martial arts were on par with theirs. Over the past few decades, they'd dominated the ocean and suppressed the pirates. Since then, they'd gained a new name for themselves, the Oceanic Clan. They were independent of the aristocrats in the U.S., and because they'd never returned to their home country, no one knew if they were real. Even the hidden clans doubted their existence. "I didn't know you made a home near Cadiz," Stephen said. "Why are you monitoring me? Are you here to finish me off?" The clan member rushed to explain. "No, an old friend of ours asked us to ensure your safety, but a lot has happened since you set foot on Mount Reef, so we lost track of you several times. We haven't been able to find you until now." "Old friend? I'm guessing you're indebted to that person?" "We are. To tell you the truth, if it weren't for our friend, we would have died out a long time ago. That's why we'll do everything we can to fulfill this request." "Can you tell me who this friend of yours is?" Stephen asked. "I'm sorry, but we don't have much information either. After saving our clan, our friend only visits us once a year and leaves in autumn." Stephen was a little disappointed to hear that. He wondered if their friend had any connection with the U.S. Whoever they were, it sounded like they were skilled and influential. "Our friend has been keeping tabs on the transatlantic summit and asked us to protect you if you survived," the clan member explained. Stephen decided to set aside his curiosity about their friend's identity for now. "You found me, so what's your plan?" "We'll escort you out of Cadiz. Although this can't be applied to when we're on land, we're invincible at sea." Stephen knew it was the truth. The Oceanic clan had been operating on the vast ocean for many years. As things stood, they would be a great help to him. "Okay, I'll leave it to you." "Thank you for trusting us. With that being said, we need to leave town immediately. The police have received a tip from 2 civilians. They described your appearance in detail, so it won't be long until they start distributing your portrait." Stephen thought back to when he'd first woken up on the beach. He remembered seeing a mother carrying her daughter and running away. They had probably reported him. He grabbed the box from the nightstand and followed the Oceanic clan out of town. Just like they'd predicted, as they left, they passed by a new wanted poster pasted next to the wanted posters of the Sovereign. Stephen's face was on the portrait. No one knew who the Sovereign was, but that wasn't the case for the former commander-in-chief of the U.S. With the Oceanic clan's assistance, Stephen left Cadiz and headed to an island on one of their ships. "This island is our territory," the clan member said. "You'll be safe here." Stephen scanned his surroundings. The ocean stretched as far as the eye could see. No one would find him here. In the days following the national burial of the sovereign, the higher-ups of the Leviathan unit gathered for a meeting. It's unfortunate. He was so young. If he took the drug with him to Cadus, he would have survived. The miracle drug could heal injuries within a few seconds, but although the researchers had succeeded in developing one batch of the drug, mass production was a different story. They handed out the first batch to those who had contributed greatly to the country for this reason. I already gave the drug to his wife after he got it, someone said. He didn't keep it for himself. He had such a big heart. I don't know if we'll ever meet someone like him again. The Leviathan unit sighed, disheartened that they would never be able to see Stephen again. Meanwhile, Rebecca was at home and scrolling through her phone when she came across a news article that caught her eye. It displayed the interior of a mansion with a familiar figure sitting by the window, facing the sea. He was holding a wine glass in his hand, looking very comfortable. The headline read, "The former Commander-in-Chief of the United States has defected to Cadus, enjoying his abundance of wealth and glory." The man had his back turned to the camera, but Rebecca was convinced that this person was Stephen. The headline confirmed it. The Cassidy family ran into the room when Rebecca screamed in outrage. They huddled around her and read the article on her phone. "Stephen really is a traitor," Harry said through clenched teeth. "The sovereign sacrificed his life for our country, but all Stephen could think about was defecting to Cadus. He's far away, so we can't give him our peace of mind, but at the very least, we have to let Kim know about this." With Rebecca's encouragement, the Cassidy family went looking for Kim. At this time, Kim had just seen the same news article circulating on the internet. "What's the matter?" Victoria asked when she saw Kim staring blankly at her phone. "There are rumors that Stephen defected to Cadus. He would never do something like that." "Where are all these people getting this nonsense from?" Victoria said, coming over to read the article. "My son isn't a traitor." While they believed the rumors were false, they didn't have evidence. What's more, the man in the photo did resemble Stephen, even if it was only his back that was shown. The doorbell rang. Kim opened the door and received a package from an unknown sender. She opened it and saw a vial inside. It contained the same drug that Stephen had given her, which she'd handed off to the Cassidy family. She'd never believed the rumors that he'd given the drug to a foreign country. Tears pricked Kim's eyes. Stephen must have sent her the drug, knowing that she'd be given the first vial to the Cassidy family. She knew he wasn't a traitor, and this was evidence. The doorbell rang again. The Cassidy family barged into the house aggressively. "Kim, didn't you see the news?" Rebecca asked as soon as she came in. "Stephen's living a luxurious life in Cadus." "He owns dozens of mansions and has assets that are worth more than $100 million, Harry added. "It won't be long before he joins the upper-class circles there. I saw a picture of him standing by the window. He's been cured somehow. He doesn't need a wheelchair anymore." Rome sneered. "That's not all. I heard he's generous with his money. He hired beautiful women to be maids in his mansion. The only reason he's been able to live such an extravagant life is because he gave the miracle drug to the enemy." "I don't care what you all think," Kim shot back. "My husband never did anything like that. That picture is fake." The Cassidy family ignored her and continued their tirade. At some point, she finally managed to kick them out. It doesn't matter what they said or how bad the gossip got. She believed in him, and once he returned, the truth would be revealed. Meanwhile, in Warhawk, Adler was in the middle of a video call with the boss of Vindictus, Odin. Odin had fabricated the news of the former commander defecting to Cadus. The police at the coastal town had received a tip that the former commander had been sighted on the beach. They'd distributed wanted posters, but no one could find him. This commotion had caught Vindictus's attention. Odin had gotten in contact with Cadus and suggested they exaggerate the truth. He'd found an expert to edit the photo to make the man resemble the former commander. The edits were seamless. Normal people wouldn't be able to tell it was a fake. I'm very pleased with your contributions, Adler said with a laugh. I've decided to reward your organization with another piece of land. Odin had released the news at an opportune moment. The Sovereign had just been killed on Mount Reef, and now the former commander had defected to Cadus. This would deal a huge blow to the United States, enough to shake its foundation. The people's morale would be negatively affected, which would give the hostile forces an advantage over the U.S. The higher-ups of the Leviathan unit were one of the few people who were aware that the former commander and the Sovereign were one and the same. Needless to say, they were dumbfounded when they saw the news. What? The former commander defected to Cadus? Wasn't he killed at the Transatlantic Summit? They looked at each other in confusion. They'd repeatedly searched the mountain's ruins for Stephen's body, only to return empty-handed. The entire mountain has been reduced to a pile of rubble, one of them said. These accusations are false. They're trying to discredit Mr. Adams's reputation. Another member spoke up in agreement. No one knows his true identity as the Sovereign, so they're trying to accuse the former commander of being the deserter to ruin the U.S. This is lethal to our country, especially since the Sovereign was recently killed. After some analysis, the Leviathan unit came to the conclusion that this was Cadus's scheme. Little did they know that their fabrication wasn't completely false. There had been someone who had witnessed Stephen and Cadus. The former commander and the Sovereign being the same person has to be kept confidential for the time being, the leader of the unit said gravely. The only thing we can do is guard the borders. Our enemy could take advantage of this commotion to launch a sneak attack. The Leviathan unit took swift action. They ordered the high-ranking officers of the military to defend the borders. The U.S. was on high alert. Tension was at an all-time high as the country prepared for the risk of another war. This was one of the darkest moments for the U.S. since the war with the Alliance. Time flew by. Soon, almost 3 months had passed. Mount Reef had become a barren wasteland of overgrown weeds. Birds would occasionally fly past the ruins, across the ocean, and finally to an island far out at sea. Stephen had been staying on the island for the past 3 months. He'd almost made a full recovery. After breaking through to the next level of the technique the priest had taught him, his cultivation had reached a profound level, and the speed of his recovery was lightning fast. Today, the Oceanic clan came to visit him. I didn't know you'd recover so quickly, one clan member remarked. Stephen felt completely different from when he'd met him at the coastal town. It's all thanks to you. This island is like a treasure trove. It's filled with the spiritual energy of the ocean and the earth. It's like the energy gathers here specifically. Even the wildlife is different. I wouldn't be able to recover slowly even if I wanted to. The clan member chuckled. If you've recovered, then it's time to leave. Stephen smiled in amusement. With his identity as the Sovereign and his connection to the friend who had requested them to help him, shouldn't they be asking him to stay for a few more days? But their insistence to get him to leave confirmed that the Oceanic clan didn't like having too much contact with the outside world, probably because they didn't want to reveal their existence. After you leave, please don't mention our clan to anyone, the clan member continued. We don't consider this a debt you need to repay. Just pretend like you never encountered us. Okay, I understand, Stephen said. The Oceanic clan had their own way of life. Staying here would only bother them. They arranged a boat for him and sent him out to sea. Stephen watched the island become smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the vast ocean. If the Oceanic clan ever had any issues in the future, he would do his best to help them. Once he got back, he would ask Aston to investigate this old friend of theirs. He had a feeling that their friend was very familiar with them. Who could it be? The Oceanic clan had arranged a small boat for Stephen. He was the only passenger, but they weren't worried about him. They could sense his profound martial arts. Even another missile couldn't injure him. A few hundred miles away from the island, Stephen encountered a heavy storm. The wooden boat he was on broke into pieces of wood. He leapt onto one of the wooden planks, riding on the wind and breaking through the waves. Sometime during his journey, Stephen passed by a cruise ship. He jumped on and blended in with the tourists. No one noticed that there was an additional passenger on board. After a day and night out at sea, the ship finally arrived at its destination, a city near the eastern border of the U.S. The number of troops stationed here had doubled. The city had issued a notice that exiting the border was allowed, but entering was not permitted. The guards stopped Stephen when he arrived at the gates. "Who are you?" they demanded suspiciously. Stephen looked past them and spotted two familiar faces standing on top of the city wall. It was Kylan and Sylvie. It was rare to see the commander-in-chief and the general of the army regarding the same area. But it made sense when he thought about it. The sovereign had been killed not too long ago, and Cadis had leaked false news that the former commander had defected to their country. The U.S. was in a crisis, and the hostile forces overseas were monitoring their every move. This was one of the main gates of the U.S., so it was a huge responsibility to make sure that it was secure. Stephen caused a commotion the moment he arrived, and it attracted Kylan and Sylvie's attention. Kylan squinted in the direction of the gates. "Isn't that Stephen?" Sylvie narrowed her eyes to get a better look. "Yeah, it's him. He came back?" "Let's head down and check on the situation," Kylan said. Kylan and Sylvie leapt down from the city wall and walked up to the gates. "Stephen?" Kylan called out. "It really is you. What are you doing here?" "Is there a problem?" "Haven't you seen the news? Don't you know what everyone's saying about you?" Kylan asked, confused that a supposed deserter was waltzing up to the gates of a country he'd betrayed as if he'd done nothing wrong. "Did you really do something like that?" Sylvie said. "If so, then I'm disappointed in you. I never thought—" She trailed off. Kylan glanced at her. "What's the matter?" "Commander Gale, did you notice he's standing up?" Kylan turned back to Stephen. Unlike the last time they saw each other, Stephen wasn't in a wheelchair. "Are you really recovered?" Sylvie asked. Stephen figured this was as good of a reason as any. "Yeah, now you can understand why I went to Cadis, right? I went to get treated. I'm all healed now, so I can do my best work for the country again." Kylan and Sylvie still looked a bit doubtful, so he added, "Do you really think the former commander, who single-handedly turned the tide against the war, would betray the country?" Although there was a big gap between Stephen and the sovereign, he had once been the savior of the U.S. His contributions were unparalleled. Theoretically, there was no reason for him to betray the U.S. Kylan gave Stephen a thoughtful look. "So those were false accusations to ruin your reputation?" Sylvie nodded. Cadis probably wanted to slander the former commander right after the sovereign's death. "I wouldn't put it past them. They've always resorted to dirty tricks. On that note, I'm glad you've recovered." Stephen knew what Kylan meant. After their duel in front of the Addams family's mansion, the public criticized Kylan for taking advantage of his condition after he fought with Johan and the 100 Grand Masters. Most of the public weren't martial artists, so they didn't understand that martial artists at Kylan and Stephen's level facing off against the Addams family was hardly a challenge. While it may not have been the most appropriate time for the duel, under normal circumstances, Kylan wouldn't have had the upper hand. The playing field would have been equal if Stephen hadn't been poisoned by Devil Hall. Either way, Kylan wanted another challenge, and Sylvie supported him. "This is the perfect opportunity. Commander Addams, I've always believed that your martial arts are superior to Kylan's. You can prove it today." Kylan was not happy to hear that, but he didn't argue with her. "There's no need for me to prove anything," Stephen replied. He didn't want to fight Kylan in front of all these soldiers. It would undermine his position as the commander-in-chief if he lost. Kylan didn't pick up on his good intentions. "Why not?" "Because you can't win." "How do you know that if we haven't fought?" Stephen let out a sigh when Kylan folded his arms across his chest. It was clear that Kylan wouldn't be moving until he accepted his challenge. "Fine. Since you insist on humiliating yourself, then don't blame me for not giving you a chance." Stephen picked up a branch on the ground and drew a small circle in the sand around him. How about this? To prevent you from losing too badly, I'll give you an advantage. If you can make me leave this circle, then I'll consider this your victory." "Are you looking down on me?" Kylan asked with a frown. Without waiting for an answer, he charged at Stephen like a bolt of lightning. His aura swept over the area. The brilliant light lit up the horizon. To the soldiers nearby, Kylan was like a raging fire that was about to engulf Stephen in a sea of flames. Some of them who were skilled in martial arts started chatting amongst themselves. "That's an incredible skill. Commander Gale is worthy of his position. The former commander is no match for him." Sylvie was concerned for Stephen. It hadn't been long since he'd recovered, and Kylan was going all out. When Kylan approached Stephen, the raging flame crackled and burned brighter. Stephen made no move to dodge. The soldiers shook their heads in disappointment. Does he have a death wish? Why is he just standing there? He's really not what he used to be. In their opinion, if it were the Sovereign in Stephen's place, and he would still have to take the fight seriously. A shockwave sent a gust of wind howling across the clearing. A series of explosions rang out. The soldiers thought Stephen was done for, but when the dust settled, it was Kylan who'd been knocked back. Everyone was stunned, especially his students. They stared at Kylan in disbelief. To them, their teacher was invincible. Sylvie had always thought that Kylan couldn't be compared to Stephen, but she'd never expected the gap to be this big. Stephen had returned to his peak condition, and he was far stronger than she'd ever imagined. Out of everyone present, Kylan was the most shocked. He couldn't believe it. He'd exchanged a few blows with Stephen, and then he was on the ground. "Did I just lose?" Stephen nodded. "You've lost." "No, I can't accept this." Kylan gathered his inner energy and stood up. His flaming aura rolled off him in waves. He took a step forward, and the ground cracked. Sylvie hadn't seen Kylan being pushed to his limit since the assassination attempt in Washington, D.C. He'd grown stronger. It seemed martial artists from the Chevalier family were far more profound than the Estrella family. She glanced at Stephen, wondering if he was deterred. On the contrary, he was calm and collected as he remained within the circle. "Is that it?" Stephen asked. He beckoned to Kylan. "Come at me!" Kylan didn't have to be told twice. He closed the distance between them in a split second. The air crackled, and the sparks flew. No one expected Stephen to hold his ground against Kylan's thunderous attack, but they were surprised once again. Stephen spun on his heel and landed a kick on Kylan's torso just as he was about to make contact. Kylan flew back and crashed to the ground. He struggled to get up, but to no avail. He couldn't believe it. Just how strong was Stephen? Kylan's students hurried over to check on him, but he waved them away, signaling that he was fine. "I told you, you can't win," Stephen said. "Why? How is this possible? What happened for you to have gotten so strong?" "You're an aristocrat, and you people don't believe in luck. The world is divided into the strong and the weak, and that's all there is to it." "Then how did you get so far ahead of me?" Kylan asked quietly. "Did you really think you won our first duel? I was planning on keeping the commander position for a bit longer, but then I realized that someone was scheming against me." Stephen explained the situation on the day he confronted the Addams family and his duel with Kylan. He left out certain details in his narration because he couldn't expose the palace. Kylan laughed in a self-deprecating way. "What a joke. So you gave me the position. I've always been a pawn in your hand. I should have trained harder with the manual that my teacher left me." "Your teacher? Are you talking about Jameson Chevalier? Sorry, but I defeated him a long time ago." Kylan was at a loss for words. He'd always been taught that the strong were forever, and the weak were forgotten. The victors survived, while the losers perished. If Stephen defeated Jameson, then was he dead? He wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Stephen recalled Jameson's spiel before he died. He'd rambled on and on about how only the strong deserved a place in the world. The weak had no reason to exist. That explained why Kylan was so fixated on rising up the ranks. He was desperate to prove himself because strength was the reason for his existence. "Kylan, The world isn't as black and white as you think it is. Your position, your strength, none of these things determine your worth. Whether you win or lose, you, like everyone else, deserve to exist. As someone who used to be the commander, I've never once questioned your qualifications to take over the position. You're loyal, and you care about the country. That's what matters. Hear that, Kylan? Sylvie teased as she helped him up. Commander Adams is wiser than you. Listen to his advice. Kylan didn't say anything after that, so Sylvie took the opportunity to ask Stephen a question that had been weighing on her mind. Commander Adams, did you really go to Cadis to recover? What medical technology do they have that the hidden clans don't? The truth is, no. I'll be honest with you. I'm the Divine Sovereign. This one sentence alone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Every soldier in the vicinity turned to look at Stephen. They were even more astonished than when he defeated Kylan without taking one step out of the circle. They found themselves considering the possibility. There was no one who could match up to Kylan in the entire military, but Stephen had taken him down in an instant. Moreover, Stephen and the Sovereign had both been headed to Cadis at around the same time. There was a high possibility that they were the same person. Kylan and Sylvie were thinking the same thing. There were so many coincidences that it wouldn't be a stretch if Stephen turned out to be the Sovereign. But then they remembered the incident 3 months ago. Kylan broke the silence. Stephen, don't pretend to be the Sovereign. I admit you're much stronger than me, but you're not at the Sovereign's level. I agree, Sylvie said. I've always supported you, but this time I'm on Commander Gale's side. You can't be the Sovereign. Stephen wasn't expecting this kind of reaction. Why are you so sure? Kylan and Sylvie exchanged a glance. Because we've seen the Sovereign's face, Sylvie explained. When the Sovereign held his first military drill, we happened to see his face. He was a middle-aged man with youthful features, but he wasn't as young as you. That was when Stephen remembered the military drill 3 months ago when Dale took his place as the Sovereign to lure Vindictus to Washington, D.C. and steal the drug. He'd forgotten that Dale had informed him that Kylan and Sylvie had seen his face. For now, it seemed like it would be impossible to convince them that he was the Sovereign. I admit that my martial arts can't be compared to yours, Kylan continued, displeasure written all over his face. I'll have nothing to say if you want to take back your position, but I won't allow you to pretend to be the Sovereign. Please don't say that again. Actually, there is a solution to this, Sylvie said with a smile. If you claim you're the Sovereign, then prove your identity. We'll believe you then. Stephen laughed. It's not like this is the first time. It doesn't matter if you believe me or not. The truth remains. Anyway, I don't have time to be held up here. I'm leaving. Are you still going to stop me from entering the city? Sylvie stepped aside. Welcome back, Commander Adams. Kylan stood there, lost in thought. Sylvie nudged him, and he came back to his senses. He joined her on the sidelines. Thank you, Stephen said. He walked past them and headed into the city. They watched Stephen until he disappeared into the distance. Commander Gale, you should think about what he said, Sylvie advised. Kylan gave her a long look before walking away without a word.